The desert wind howled across the remote military base as General Marcus Stone stepped out of his transport vehicle, his boots crunching against the sand-covered tarmac. He had come to inspect the Special Operations Training Facility, a place where the military's best were supposed to be forged. His assistant, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, walked beside him, clipboard in hand, reading off the day's schedule. The general's jaw was set firm, his gray eyes scanning the compound with the practiced gaze of a man who had seen 3 decades of service. He had no patience for mediocrity, and even less for soldiers who didn't meet his exacting standards. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Among the rows of soldiers standing at attention was Private First Class Elena Reyes, a woman of 24 with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, her standard-issue rifle slung across her shoulder. The weapon looked ordinary, perhaps even neglected, its finish worn from use but clearly maintained to regulation standards. What the general couldn't see from his distance was the small badge pinned inside her uniform jacket, hidden from view. Elena had learned long ago that sometimes it was better to let people underestimate you. The inspection began at 9:30 a.m., with the general walking down the line of soldiers, asking sharp questions and examining equipment with a critical eye. When he reached Elena, he stopped and frowned. "Private, your rifle looks like it's been through a sandstorm," he said, his voice carrying across the silent formation. Elena met his gaze without flinching. "Sir, it has been through many storms, but it shoots true every time," she replied calmly. The general's frown deepened. "Shooting true doesn't mean much if you don't take pride in your equipment's appearance. A soldier's weapon is an extension of themselves." He moved on without waiting for a response, leaving Elena standing rigid, her face betraying nothing of what she felt inside. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes made a note on his clipboard, and Elena knew what that meant. She would likely be assigned extra duties, perhaps be pulled from the upcoming selection trials for an important mission. The general clearly thought she was just another soldier who didn't care enough, who didn't have what it took. As the morning inspection concluded and the soldiers were dismissed, Elena returned to her quarters, a small room she shared with 3 other women. Her bunkmate, Specialist Tara Morrison, shook her head sympathetically. "That was rough, Reyes." The general seemed really disappointed. Elena sat on her bunk and carefully removed her jacket, revealing the badge pinned to the inside. It was silver and gold with crossed rifles and a number that made Tara's eyes widen. 3,200 meters. "You never told me you earned the long-range badge," Tara whispered, leaning closer. "Elena, that's legendary. Only 12 people in the entire military have that qualification. Why don't you wear it on your uniform?" Elena carefully tucked the badge away in a small wooden box her father had given her before his deployment years ago. "Because the moment you show people what you can do, they start treating you differently," she said quietly. "They either put you on a pedestal or they try to tear you down. I'd rather let my work speak for itself when it matters." Tara sat back, processing this. "But the general just wrote you off. Doesn't that bother you?" Elena smiled slightly. "If I'm needed, they'll find out what I can do. Until then, I keep my head down and do my job." That afternoon, while the general was reviewing mission proposals in the base commander's office, an urgent message came through from Central Command. A reconnaissance team had been pinned down in the mountains 70 kilometers north, surrounded by hostile forces in a valley that offered no easy rescue options. The team had critical intelligence that couldn't fall into enemy hands, but they were trapped on a rocky outcrop with no way out. Rescue helicopters couldn't reach them due to heavy weapons fire from multiple positions in the surrounding hills. The situation was desperate and time was running out. The team's communications officer had estimated they had maybe 6 hours before their position was completely overrun. General Stone spread the tactical map across the table, his experienced eyes tracing the terrain. "We need a precision team," he said, his finger tapping on a ridgeline 3 kilometers from where the reconnaissance team was trapped. "If we can insert sharpshooters here and here, they could take out the heavy weapons positions and create a corridor for helicopter extraction." The base commander, Colonel Sarah Webb, nodded. "I'll assemble our best marksmen immediately. We have several qualified snipers on base." She began making calls, pulling personnel records, coordinating with the armory. Within 20 minutes, 4 highly decorated snipers were standing in the briefing room, ready to receive their orders. But as Colonel Webb reviewed the mission parameters, her expression grew troubled. "General, we have a problem," she said, her voice tight with concern. "The longest clear shot to neutralize the enemy positions is 3,000 meters, possibly more depending on wind conditions and final positioning. Our snipers here are excellent, but their longest confirmed kills are between 1,800 and 2,200 meters. This mission requires someone who can consistently hit targets at extreme range under pressure." The general's fist came down on the table. "Then we don't have a choice. We send in ground troops for a frontal assault and accept the casualties." The four snipers looked at each other uncomfortably, knowing that such an assault would likely result in significant losses on both sides. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Sir, there might be another option. When I was making notes during this morning's inspection, I cross-referenced personnel files as I always do." He pulled up a file on his tablet and turned it toward the general. "Private First Class Elena Reyes, the soldier you spoke to about her rifle. Her file shows she holds the 3,200-meter qualification badge. She earned it 18 months ago at the Advanced Marksmanship Center, achieving 5 consecutive hits at that range in variable wind conditions. The instructors noted she was the youngest person ever to earn that badge and only the 4th woman." The room fell silent. General Stone stared at the file, then at Hayes, then back at the file. "The private with the worn rifle?" he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "That's impossible. Why wasn't she wearing her badge? Why isn't this prominently noted in her service record?" Colonel Webb pulled up Elena's full file. "It's here, sir, but it's not flagged because she never requested transfer to a specialized sniper unit. She's been serving in regular infantry rotations, performing standard duties. Her shooting scores are perfect, but she's never drawn attention to herself. According to her performance reviews, she's described as competent, reliable, and reserved." The general sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had judged her harshly just hours ago, dismissed her as someone who didn't take proper pride in her service. Now he was being told she might be the only person on the base who could save 5 lives and prevent critical intelligence from being lost. "Get her in here," he said finally. "Now." Within 10 minutes, Elena was standing at attention in the briefing room, her face calm but her heart pounding. She had been pulled from an equipment maintenance rotation and told only that the general wanted to see her immediately. As she entered the room and saw the maps, the assembled officers, and the serious expressions on every face, she knew something significant was happening. "Private Reyes," the general began, his voice different now, more measured and respectful. "I owe you an apology for my comments this morning. I made assumptions based on appearances, and that was wrong of me." Elena remained at attention, unsure how to respond. The general gestured to a chair. "Sit down, please. We need to talk about your capabilities." As Elena sat, still uncertain, Colonel Webb explained the situation with the trapped reconnaissance team. The room's large screen showed satellite imagery of the mountain valley, with red markers indicating enemy positions and a small blue circle showing where their people were surrounded. "We need someone who can make shots at 3,000 meters or more," the general said, watching Elena's face carefully. "Your file says you have that qualification. Is that accurate? Can you actually make those shots, or was it just a training exercise?" Elena met his gaze directly. "Sir, I can make those shots. I made them in training, and I've made them since then during advanced practice sessions I do on my own time. My rifle may look worn, but I've customized it for extreme range work. The finish is weathered because I've tested it in every condition I can find, making sure I know exactly how it performs in heat, cold, wind, and moisture." She paused, then added quietly, "I can help those soldiers, sir. If you'll let me." The general leaned forward. "Why didn't you transfer to a specialized unit? Why hide what you can do?" Elena took a breath before answering. "My father was a sniper, sir. He was one of the best and everyone knew it. But when he deployed, the enemy knew it too. They identified him, targeted him specifically, and he barely made it home. He can't walk without assistance now. And he lives with pain every day because he was too well known, too obvious a target. I learned from watching him that sometimes being the best means painting a target on yourself. I'd rather be effective when needed than famous." The honesty in her words hung in the air, and the general saw something in her eyes that he recognized, the quiet courage of someone who had thought deeply about service and sacrifice. "All right, Private," the general said, standing. "You're authorized for this mission. Pick whatever gear you need from the armory. You'll be inserted on this ridge here, he pointed to the map. At 1600 hours, that's 4 p.m. You'll have approximately 2 hours of good light to identify and neutralize 4 heavy weapons positions marked here, 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 and here. Once those are cleared, our helicopters can extract the reconnaissance team. Questions? Elena studied the map intently, her mind already calculating angles, wind patterns from the terrain features, and potential complications. Sir, I'd like to bring a spotter. Specialist Morrison has done distance calculations with me before. She knows how I work. Approved, Colonel Webb said immediately. Anything else? Elena pointed to one of the marked positions on the map. This position on the eastern slope is in shadow for most of the afternoon. The thermal variation will affect the shot trajectory. I'll need current temperature readings from that area if possible. The assembled officers exchanged glances, impressed by her immediate grasp of the complexities involved. The general nodded slowly. We'll get you everything you need. Hayes, coordinate with meteorology for updated wind and temperature data. Webb, make sure Private Reyes has complete access to any equipment she requests. This mission launches in 3 hours. As the briefing broke up and people hurried to their assigned tasks, the general asked Elena to stay behind for a moment. When the room was empty except for the 2 of them, he walked to the window overlooking the base. I've been a general for 7 years, Private, and I've learned a lot in that time. But today you taught me something important about assumptions and pride. He turned to face her. I saw your worn rifle and made a judgment about your dedication. But you were dedicated in a way I didn't recognize. Dedicated to the mission and your people rather than to appearances or recognition. That's a rare quality. Elena didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. Sir, I just want to bring those soldiers home. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Elena went to the armory and retrieved her personal rifle, the one the general had criticized that morning. She also gathered specialized ammunition designed for extreme range work. A custom scope she had purchased herself and modified with a ballistics expert's help, and environmental sensors that would help Tara calculate atmospheric conditions. By 2:30 p.m., she and Tara were on a helicopter heading north, the mountains growing larger in the windscreen as they approached the operational area. Neither woman spoke much during the flight, both lost in their own thoughts, checking and rechecking equipment with practiced precision. They were inserted on a rocky ridge overlooking the valley at 3:57 p.m., just as planned. The helicopter disappeared quickly, leaving them alone in the vast silence of the mountains. Elena immediately set up her position, using natural rock formations for concealment and support. Tara lay beside her with a spotting scope and a tablet running ballistic software, her fingers already flying across the screen as she input data from the environmental sensors they had placed around their position. The wind was tricky here, swirling through the valley in unpredictable patterns, and the temperature gradients between the sun-warmed slopes and shadowed areas would make each shot a complex calculation. First target is 3,100 meters, Tara whispered. Reading the rangefinder data. Wind is 4.2 meters per second from the northeast, but it's gusting. Temperature differential between us and target is 18 degrees. Humidity 42%. Elena settled into her shooting position, her breathing slowing as she entered the focused state she had trained years to achieve. Through her scope, she could see the heavy machine gun position that was preventing the rescue helicopters from approaching. 3 figures moved around it, confident in their protected position, unaware they were being watched from over 3 kilometers away. She could also see in the distance the small rocky outcrop where her fellow soldiers were trapped, their defensive position growing smaller and more desperate by the hour. Elena made minute adjustments to her scope, factoring in all the variables Tara had provided, plus her own intuitive understanding of how her rifle performed in these conditions. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, but she didn't fire yet. She watched the valley, learning its rhythms, understanding how the wind moved, how the light changed as the sun slowly descended. Minutes ticked by, 4:15 p.m., 4:20 p.m. Tara remained silent, trusting Elena's judgment about when to take the shot. In the distance, they heard the faint sound of gunfire as the trapped reconnaissance team fought to hold their position. At 4:28 p.m., the wind steadied for a moment and Elena felt rather than saw that the conditions were right. She exhaled slowly, her heartbeat calm, her entire being focused on a target so distant it seemed impossible to hit. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, and then there was nothing to do but wait. At these distances, the bullet took several seconds to reach its target, traveling through constantly changing air, affected by gravity and wind and temperature and 1,000 other tiny factors. Elena had done everything she could. Now physics would decide the outcome. Through the spotting scope, Tara watched the distant machine gun position. "Hit," she breathed. "Direct hit. The weapon is down." Elena didn't celebrate, didn't even smile. She was already shifting to locate the second target, her mind focused entirely on the mission. The second position was even farther, 3,240 meters, her scope reading. This one was in the shadowed area she had worried about during the briefing, and the temperature differential made the calculations even more complex. Tara worked quickly, updating her figures, whispering corrections. Add 0.8 meters for drop. Wind has shifted to northeast by east. 3.9 meters per second. The second shot came at 4:41 p.m., and once again Elena's calculations proved perfect. The heavy weapon position went silent, its threat eliminated by a bullet fired from a distance so great the enemy didn't even know where the shots were coming from. But now things got complicated. The other two positions had realized they were under attack and were moving, trying to find cover, looking for the source of the shots that seemed to come from nowhere. Elena had to work faster now, finding targets that were no longer stationary, adjusting for movement and increasing wind as the valley's air patterns changed with the approaching evening. The third shot missed. Elena saw the dust kick up 2 meters left of where the target had moved at the last instant. She didn't let frustration distract her, simply worked the bolt action smoothly, chambering another round, adjusting her aim. Tara was already updating calculations for the target's new position. "He's moving toward the rocks, 3,040 meters now. Wind is getting worse." Elena tracked the distant figure, her finger steady on the trigger, waiting for the moment when movement and wind and all the complex variables aligned. The shot came at 4:56 p.m., and this time the target fell. One position left, but it was the most difficult. The fourth heavy weapon was at 3,300 meters, the longest shot Elena had ever attempted outside of a controlled training environment, and the gunner had now taken cover behind a boulder, exposing himself only briefly to fire at the trapped reconnaissance team. Elena would have to time her shot perfectly, taking it in the split second when the target was visible, with no time for adjustment or second chances. The sun was lower now, creating glare and shadows that made seeing difficult. Her muscles ached from holding position for over an hour, and she could feel the fatigue trying to creep into her concentration. "He fires in patterns," Tara observed, watching through the spotting scope. Every 45 seconds he exposes himself for about 3 seconds to fire a burst, then drops back behind the boulder. Elena nodded, watching, learning the rhythm. She would have one chance, maybe two if she was lucky. Missing would mean the rescue couldn't proceed, would mean 5 soldiers would likely die as darkness fell and the enemy closed in. The weight of those lives pressed on her, but she pushed the feeling aside. Emotion would ruin the shot. She needed to be calm, clear, perfect. At 5:18 p.m., as the fourth target rose to fire another burst, Elena took her shot. The report of her rifle echoed across the valley one last time, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then through the spotting scope, Tara saw the heavy weapon tilt and fall silent. "That's 4 for 4, she said, her voice filled with relief and admiration. "All targets neutralized." Elena finally allowed herself to breathe fully, the tension draining from her shoulders. Below in the valley, they heard the sound of helicopter rotors as the rescue birds swooped in, no longer under threat from the heavy weapons positions. The extraction of the reconnaissance team took 12 minutes. Elena and Tara watched from their ridge as the helicopters hovered over the rocky outcrop, taking fire from small arms but protected now from the heavy weapons that Elena had silenced from over 3 kilometers away. One by one, the trapped soldiers were lifted to safety, and then the helicopters disappeared into the darkening sky, carrying their precious cargo of lives and intelligence back to safety. Only then did Elena finally move from her shooting position, her muscles stiff and sore. "We should get to our extraction point," Tara said quietly. "Our ride will be here in 20 minutes." When they returned to base at 7:43 p.m., General Stone was waiting on the landing pad despite the late hour. As Elena and Tara climbed down from the helicopter, exhausted and covered in dust, the general approached. He didn't salute, That would come later in a more formal setting, but his expression held a respect that needed no words. The reconnaissance team is safe, Private Reyes. All 5 soldiers made it home because of you. The intelligence they carried will save countless more lives in operations to come. Elena stood at attention, her worn rifle slung over her shoulder, looking no different than she had that morning when the general had judged her so harshly. "Thank you, sir," she said simply. "I'm glad I could help." The general shook his head slightly. "You did far more than help, Private. You accomplished something that very few people in the world could have done, under pressure and with lives at stake." He paused, then added, "I learned something important today about looking beyond the surface, about the difference between appearance and substance. I won't forget that lesson." Elena nodded, accepting his words without false modesty or pride. She had done her job, nothing more or less, and that was enough for her. In the days that followed, the story of the mission spread through the base, though Elena did her best to avoid the attention. The reconnaissance team sought her out to thank her personally, their gratitude genuine and touching. Other soldiers looked at her differently now, with respect but also with a new understanding that extraordinary capability often came in quiet, unassuming packages. The general ensured that Elena's actions were properly documented and recognized, though he also, at her request, didn't create the kind of public spectacle that would make her uncomfortable, or put a target on her back the way her father had feared. 3 weeks later, at a small ceremony attended only by her unit and senior officers, Elena was promoted and awarded a commendation for valor. The general personally pinned the medal on her uniform, and as he did, he noticed she was now wearing her 3,200-meter sniper badge on the outside of her jacket, visible for all to see. "A change of heart?" he asked quietly. Elena smiled slightly. "You taught me something too, sir. Sometimes hiding who you are isn't the same as being humble. Sometimes people need to see what's possible, to know that capability and dedication can look different than they expect. If wearing this badge helps even one soldier understand that, then it's worth the attention." The general stepped back and rendered a crisp salute, which Elena returned with equal precision. As the small ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, he watched her walk away with her fellow soldiers, her worn rifle still over her shoulder, the rifle he had once dismissed. That had turned out to be one of the most effective weapons on the entire base. He thought about assumptions and appearances, about the quiet courage of those who do their duty without seeking glory, and about how a general could still learn new lessons even after 30 years of service. The story of the private who saved 5 lives from 3,200 meters away became one of those tales told in military circles, growing in the telling but never quite capturing the full truth of that day, because the real story wasn't about impossible shots or dramatic rescues. It was about a young woman who chose substance over show, who honored her father's sacrifice by being excellent in her own quiet way, and about a general who learned to look deeper than surface appearances. It was a reminder that true capability often walks among us unrecognized, waiting for the moment when it's truly needed, and that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected teachers.